Hi, my name is Vickie Karasic, and I am an educational technology specialist at Bryn Mawr College.
Hi, I'm Meaghan Moody. I'm the Immersive Technologies Librarian at the University of Rochester.
Hi, I'm Melanie Peron. I'm a senior lecturer in French at the University of Pennsylvania.
And we'll be presenting our project called Stitching the Fragmented, Critical Making as a Strategy for Language and Culture Learning.
This is Melanie Peron. I'm a senior lecturer in French at the University of Pennsylvania. I'll first provide some background information about our projects. The course Paris under the German occupation and its places of non-memory is an advanced history and culture French course. In this course, we will explore the dark years of the Vichy regime's collaboration with Nazi Germany. Thus, we will be exploring a past that none of us has experienced directly, and not just any past, a past which was repressed, masked, disguised, a past full of shadows, a past only spoken of in whispers, a past recalled by memories with gaping holes. How can one talk about what happened? What words can one use to tell the story of the missing? These were some of the challenges faced by the post-Auschwitz society. This is the challenge of the course. Paris will be our anchor in this course. Paris, capital torturer, capital victim, capital witness. We will listen for the whispers of stories trapped among its streets and walls that many wanted to lock away, to silence, upon the Libération. These are the stories that we will then try to catch, to restore in flesh and voice, to hold on to as we engage in the difficult exercise of remembrance. It goes without saying that the goal will not be to judge, but to try to understand a past that does not pass. The project Mémoire de Guerre was created to respond as much as possible to the question, how can students of French from an American university understand a past neither of us lived and which happened far from their home? The writing project follows 3 consecutive steps. Students discover one at a time. Anchoring, ancrage. In order to know, we must imagine for ourselves. Georges Didier Huberman says in his essays, Images in Spite of All, 4 photographs of Auschwitz. At the beginning of the semester, students invented a character whose memoirs they wrote every week for the first 6 weeks. They were encouraged to fold in the stories of their fictional character fragments extracted from testimonies and historical information provided by the course. The woven textual corpus provided gave them the words and images necessary to express the story of their character and to participate in giving shape to the voids and silences left in history. The first part of the project was a conventional narrative anchored in a seemingly accurate historical context whose outcome was unknown to even the authors themselves. The students embarked on a blind journey. Ancrage, inking. In the second part of the semester, students were prompted to write under predefined constraints inspired by Oulipian experimental works. For example, write a text where one letter of the alphabet does not appear, write a text around or about numbers. These experimental texts were then personally interspersed in their characters' memoirs, interweaving the different structures aimed at representing the very nature of the course topic, mending holes by connecting fragments and fleeting traces. Anamorphosis. Finally, students had to create a 3D representation of silence, guilt, or void. Once placed in the very middle of the text made of their character's narrative and the experimental writing pieces, this new piece functioned as a convex mirror in an anamorphic construction. It enabled all the fragments of their writing to coalesce and take shape. To sum up, the act of writing enabled these young authors to conjure up stories which were either forgotten by their own family, interrupted in the case of a relative who died during the war, or never happened. In any case, they prolonged a time that was not supposed to be heard. Je n'entends pas ce qu'elle dit. I cannot hear what she says. The lexical confusion of a student whose mother tongue is Spanish was the seminal moment. Translating entender, to understand, by the French entendre, to hear, to explain that she did not understand what the author said in her diary written in 1942 made so much sense. The apparent mistake conjured up a series of fundamental questions. How to understand a story if you do not hear the voice that tells it? How to make sense of words pronounced by voices without context? How to envisage Paris under the German occupation without knowing its spaces? I needed to make an interactive map which would help my students, some of whom had never been to Paris, envision as best as possible the Paris of the time, but also a map which would become the space where the stories of individuals who vanished recovered their voices. This spatial visualization of history aimed at reducing the historical and psychological distance which separates us from then and them. For instance, one could tell students that 13,000 Jews, most of whom lived in East Paris, were rounded up on July 16, 1942, and taken to a velodrome located in West Paris before being sent to concentration camps. It would not trigger the same understanding of history as showing them on the map where the velodrome stood once they see how close it was to the Eiffel Tower, held as a symbol of modernity and culture. They understand how unfathomable the event was at the time and still is. It also enables them to wonder how Parisians could say they did not know when many of them must have witnessed the day-long procession of buses crossing the city from east to west. These were questions post-war France had to face too. The outcome of the mapping project made me believe students should be more involved in the very creation of heuristic tools through technology and become creators of new information themselves. Critical making, as defined by Matt Ratto, provides a framework for the following projects in which students were collaborators. Described as bridging the gap between creative, physical, and conceptual exploration, critical making emphasizes the investment of the self and care to bear responsibility and ownership over one's work.
This is Vickie Karasic, and I worked at Penn Libraries between 2017 and 2019 as the French and Francophone Studies librarian and the managing librarian of the Weigel Information Commons, a high-tech collaborative space in the library. I now want to shift gears to the technical parts of our project, which started with thinking about not only what we wanted to accomplish with the map, but how we wanted to accomplish it. To put our project into context, Melanie had been part of a history with the Weigel Information Commons, and especially of language educators who had used the Commons as a place of experimentation where faculty could try a new approach in their teaching and where we would help with assignment creation, from teaching students a tool to showcasing and archiving the student work. This is how we envisioned the digital map project working at first, but student involvement did not come until later when the map was more developed. First, we wanted to pick a tool that had all the functionality that we needed, but also that was free, easy to teach students, and would have the ability to have multiple students work on the platform at one time. We wanted to keep a more traditional map-like look and feel, and have a platform that was more humane than sterile. The objective was for the map to get students closer to the subject, and we needed to be careful that the feel of the platform did not contribute to further distance. As we experimented, we found that this golden tool didn't quite exist. Some had some features, but not all, or it wasn't free, or it wasn't easy for group collaboration. Aside from testing particular tools, we also looked for examples and learned more through others' projects and at conferences. For example, in 2017, we attended the Northeast Association for Language Learning Technology Conference, where we learned about Daniel Lisowitz's Mapping the Italian Renaissance Epic, a mapping project done in Neatline. We also consulted with digital humanities folks at Penn Libraries and other departments on Penn's campus who could help, including consulting with and attending a presentation of a Penn graduate student who was working on mapping Dante's Divine Comedy with his students using My Google Map in a project called Mapping Dante. Through these explorations, we came to the realization that this map could not be built from an out-of-the-box tool. It would involve a structure that would need to be developed for us, at least initially, but then that Melanie and her students could learn how to use and contribute data to. This is the point at which we consulted the Price Lab for the Digital Humanities and learned about their faculty grant program, which provides faculty funds for student workers and software to contribute to projects. Once Melanie received this grant, Price Lab students worked on the map's development over the summer in order to build the platform and teach us how to use it in the fall. This opened the door for so much more we could do with the map and think about, including in the final product, which had developed greatly from our original ideas at this point. Omeka, the free open-source web authoring tool, is the platform on which the map lives and which gives the site context, providing users with a gallery-like walk through the lives of the witnesses and post-memory writers. With Omeka, each item, including images, videos, and files that you upload, allows you to create metadata using the Dublin Core schema, which is heavily used in libraries. The schema has a learning curve, especially for students, but it's a great teaching tool for students to learn about the kinds of data that are attached to any objects they upload online. It also allows for various plugins to create items such as interactive maps and photo galleries. The plugin that we used in this project to create the map feature is called Neatline. To get the map on Neatline, we first had to scan and upload a paper map from the 1940s that Melanie had found and purchased on eBay. The scanned map was geo-rectified and layered on top of a map of modern-day Paris. In this way, the historical map geolocates key historical places, such as monuments, German-occupied places, and French collaborationist places. The map pins come with a description of a place before, during, and after World War II, and now, and also come with images, memoir excerpts, press articles, and videos. The buttons are custom-made to visually identify a variety of places. The memory map geolocates places linked with witnesses who vanished during the war or whose parents died in deportation. The three little stars on this map identify these places to recall the image of a constellation and the idea of interconnection between national and personal, then and now, here and there.
The course material includes the autobiographical novel entitled On the Inner Stage, written by Marcel Cohen. The author tells the story of his family members who never came back from deportation. Through the memories of the 5-year-old boy he was at the time and objects that belonged to his loved ones, he takes the reader to the Parisian places which witnessed his childhood. Following the same method as the historical map, I geolocated the places mentioned in his narrative so students could connect the childhood spaces of the author to the historical occupation of the city. Another key material are the testimonies Arlette Testiller, Francine Christophe, and Rachel Jedinac left with the USC Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive. The three survivors lived in Paris before and during part of the war, before being interned, deported, or hidden. These audiovisual narratives literally help the students hear the past. In July 2019, Rachel Jedinac took me to her childhood neighborhood and walked me through the places of memory from her childhood, including from the terrible day of July 16, 1942, when the French police arrested her with her mother and sister. Using a 360 camera, Rachel was filmed in front of where her home, her grandparents, and her cousin's home stood, inside her elementary school, in front of the building the Jews of her neighborhood were locked in before being bused to the Vélodrome d'Hiver. The videos were then added to a digital map dedicated to Rachel. This original experience with virtual reality technology enabled the digital cartographic translation to dawn a humanity that speaks to us today. It also inspired the following student task-based digital projects we want to share with you. Last fall, the course included an 8-day trip to Paris conducted after the end of the semester. One section was taught in French with 14 students, and the other in English with 8 students. On campus, the students were asked to curate a web page for a witness from the Shoah Foundation VHA, including a digital map locating the key places mentioned by the witness. In the French section, in groups of 5 people, students were entrusted with the stories of Arlette, Francine, and Rachel. The students from the English section in pairs had to find testimonies made in English from survivors who, at the time of the war, lived in Paris. While in Paris, students were asked to go back to all the places they already knew since they had mapped them and gathered documentation to be added to their webpage. The project allowed students to physically retrace the steps they had remotely taken on the digital platform. Above all, it enabled them to literally be walking the witnesses' steps. Despite the changes the streets underwent through time, the students were anachronistic reminders of the stories that took place under today's facades and are forgotten by many. They became archiving connectors between then and now, peeling off the superimposed layers, covering what was once the reality of their witnesses. And here you have a picture of Nathan, whose story two of the English section students took care of. And while we were in Paris, Nathan was guiding the two students to go back to his places of memory in Paris. While still on campus, 4 groups of students chose one particular place described On the Inner Stage. They wanted to film using a 360 camera in Paris. We were fortunate to be able to show Marcel Cohen one of the videos on the Oculus headset firsthand and witnessed the empathy triggered by VR.
This is Meaghan Moody, and I worked at Penn Libraries from July 2018 to February 2020 as the Teaching and Learning Librarian. Virtual reality is often described as an empathy machine because it offers opportunities for closer, more personal storytelling that exceed the bounds of 2D filmmaking. Countless 360 documentaries exist that leverage this technology to engage the potential of a fuller and more complex narrative in which the user may walk in the shoes of another. 360 films have been used to investigate a range of human crises, including the hardships of life in refugee camps, the effects of climate change, and the restriction of access to reproductive health care. 360 filmmakers pay close attention to point of view, voiceover narrative, spatial audio, and movement to achieve a sense of presence for the viewer, allowing them to relate to and feel invested in the story. We were curious about the possibilities of 360 for this project, and getting again at the question of how to cultivate deeper empathy and understanding of these histories for students. Through 360 videos, students would not only be able to visit these places where they cannot physically go, but also view them from the context of Marcel Cohen's memories, moving as he would have moved, hearing his words with voiceover narration, being part of the story themselves, and having the freedom to look and notice. Furthermore, positioning the students as creators of these experiences caused them to ask deeper questions and play a more active role in the history. As these videos will be used as future course material, we not only ask students to interpret Marcel Cohen's words through these recordings, but also to consider the viewer's perspective to produce a compelling and illuminating learning experience. In the fall of 2019, I led both class sections and workshops in which they were introduced to the basics of 360 filming, covering terminology, examples, equipment, and software. Students were also able to demo the 360 experiences Melanie shot in the summer of 2019 of Rochelle's story. I worked closely with staff members of the Vitale Digital Media Lab at Penn Libraries, who served as consultants and provided all of the equipment for students. We decided to go with the consumer-grade Insta360 1X camera, which is very lightweight and beginner-friendly. In class, students also practiced getting out of shot and interviewing one another. Students visited their film locations remotely with Google Earth to get a sense of the space, and we asked students to practice as much as they could with the cameras before leaving for Paris. We posed questions to them to get them thinking more critically about recording in 360. At what height should the tripod stand? Lower to mimic Marcel Cohen's experience as a child, or higher to indicate his reflections as an adult? Where would his gaze be in each instance? Students started recording almost immediately upon arriving in Paris. On the second day, we journeyed to Parc Monceau, a location featured prominently on the inner stage. Students then separated into their groups and started filming and moving through the city as led by Marcel Cohen's story. Over the next few days, the students edited their footage with the Insta360 Studio desktop software. Some of them simply used the software to export the raw footage into MP4 files, which were later uploaded to Box. Others trimmed and created clips. One group experimented further with Adobe Premiere Pro to make transitions between clips and initiate a center point. As Melanie mentioned, students were later able to share clips they had recorded with Marcel Cohen. He and his spouse, Jacqueline, graciously invited all 25 of us to his apartment. Students were able to ask questions and get feedback on their work directly from the subject with whose work they had been engaging for months. Observing the interactions between the students and Marcel Cohen and seeing how the students reflected and made changes to their videos was a truly profound experience. The visit deeply impressed upon the students their responsibility in interpreting and preserving this history. In On the Inner Stage, Marcel Cohen describes the scent of his father's cologne, one of the few memories he has of him. Here you can see him sharing a bottle of this cologne with the students so they too might know the scent. Students felt personally invested in their projects and recognized the interwoven constellation of their work, their own experiences in Paris, and their interactions with the witnesses and their stories. Turning back to Ratto and the interconnectedness of the making process and its focus on care and responsibility, this intersects with the feminist ethic of care that has been a cornerstone of this course in guided engagement with students. Students were asked to align their own experiences and empathize with the story of the witnesses. The care they exercised in this project was transformative and extended beyond the conclusion of the course.
On December 7th, 2014 in Oslo, Patrick Modiano said, after receiving the Nobel Prize, "Today I get the sense that memory is much less sure of itself, engaged as it is in a constant struggle against amnesia and oblivion. This layer, this mass of oblivion that obscures everything, means we can only pick up fragments of the past, disconnected traces, fleeting and almost ungraspable human destinies. Yet, it has to be the vocation of the novelist, when faced with this large blank page of oblivion, to make a few faded words visible again, like lost icebergs adrift on the surface of the ocean." The students might not fit the stricto sensu definition of novelists, but thanks to digital technology, they were nonetheless all at once curators, cartographers, 3D printmakers, videographers, and most importantly, critical makers. As such, we strongly believe they benevolently fulfill Modiano's civic vocation of the writer.